please speak up and give me your opinions when we discuss things. It really helps me a lot. So, like I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about stakeholder management. And just as a bridge from what we talked about in our last sessions, in the last sessions we defined what projects are and how to start them, and how to define the scope and gather the requirements for our projects. Now, today we're going to ask, who cares about your project and how do you work with them efficiently? Today, you should all have a draft of component 1, which was your project definition and identifying who your stakeholders are. Now, for next week, you should have a draft of components 2 and 3. Component 2 is going to be the scope and the requirements, which is based on module 2 that we covered last week. And component 3, which is your work breakdown and timeline. And that's going to be based on module 4 that we're going to do later today. To start, I want to show you a video about how to identify your stakeholders easily. And the stakeholders are key because they're going to form your team, at least most of them will, your internal stakeholders. We're going to take a look at a video by Adriana Girdler, and she's going to be talking about how to identify stakeholders. This is a pretty short video, but it's pretty powerful. So let's take a look. So what are stakeholders? Yes. So anyone that is associated with the project, is that what you said? Okay. And what more can you tell us about them?
It can be team members.
Yeah, team members. Suppliers. Yeah, and what type of a stakeholder is a supplier? Yeah, from the outside, so that would be an external. Mm-hmm. Very good, yeah. And what else? Internal stakeholders, yeah.
Which might be maybe a manager.
Managers, absolutely. Anything else? Anyone else? Right. And sometimes we don't think about team members as being stakeholders, but they very much are. They have a stake in the outcome of the project. And she mentions checking your documents. What documents is she referring to? Well, what's one document that you are working on or that you will be working on? A document that's going to be part of your project plan. Well, what about your scope statement?
Oh, scope statement.
Right? That tells you what's in and what's out. That you can understand who your stakeholders are when you look at your scope statement. Another document that she mentions that it doesn't really fit into the scope of what we are doing, but is the charter. And who remembers how I described the charter last week? What's special, or what does the word charter mean to you? Like if an organization is developed, sometimes they will create a charter. What is that? It's a framework of the plan. Yeah, maybe it's a definition of the organization. But one special thing that it does is it's a document that comes after approval.
And it has all the requirements of the project.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. It's all the requirements that everyone is aware of. And something that Adriana does is she says she has everyone sign the charter. And why is that important? Exactly. There should be an agreement from all the sides. It's a way of getting buy-in from everyone on the team, that you agree as to what the scope is, what the process is going to be. So that's why a certain level of detail is necessary, that because you're going to put it all into a charter. We're not exactly doing a charter as part of our project planning, but you want to think about it that way, that it needs to be defined enough that everyone knows the role that they play, and everyone has agreed, is on the same page, and there's buy-in of everyone. Very good. And why, she mentions brainstorming sessions. What is a brainstorming session, and how does it help you working with your stakeholders?
Additional insights as well from different stakeholders, from different people concerning the project.
That's right, you get more insights, because remember, as a project manager, and in this role of a project planner, you are a leader, but leaders don't do things on their own. It's very important that we get enrollment from everyone that's on our team. So by having a brainstorming session, we're able to make sure that everyone's input is considered. So how do you think you can, in a theoretical process like you're doing for your assignments, what could you do to create a brainstorming session? It's kind of a trick question. Maybe not. What could you use that could be like your team? How can you get feedback from other people? Like in Sela's case, like how could you get feedback from IT and customer success team and ground crews? Yeah, and exactly. You're describing the process if you actually had a team, but for the planning purposes. All right, I'm going to tell. What about using AI? This is actually a really good use of AI. You can say, I'm doing this project. Help me brainstorm what the different stakeholders might bring. And you could have like a virtual brainstorming session with AI playing the roles of the different stakeholders. And now you're not using that to replicate your thinking, you're using it to boost your own strategic thinking. So that's something to think about. And that would, yeah.
You mentioned something about SIPOC.
Yeah, like SIPOC, yeah. That's something that's a little bit outside of the scope. And it's an acronym, and it means something like suppliers, information process, something, and it goes from suppliers to customers. And it's a document that helps you understand how the suppliers, how they how they connect with the project. But that's something that's out of the scope of what we're going to be doing. But it brings up a good point. As you're trying to figure out who your stakeholders are, you're looking in other areas. You're looking at your scope statement. You're looking at your work breakdown structure. You're looking at your charter. And it's like a circular process. It's not strictly linear, right? As you start working on your work breakdown structure, you realize, oh, I need to involve somebody else from IT for this, because I need to involve someone from HR to work with on SOPs, standard operating procedures, because we can't just implement these changes and not educate the team on what these changes are. So you're going to be going back and forth. And the SIPOC is just like another document that you could dig into to try and understand who your who your stakeholders are. And it could be almost never ending, which is why, especially for our class, we want to keep everything contained a little bit. All right. So now I'd like you to take out your notebooks and on a fresh page, write Module 3, write today's date, and then write my process for identifying stakeholders at the top of the page. And I want you to think about how you will identify stakeholders for your project. Or if you've already been working on this, then how did you go about identifying them? On a strategic level. So it's not so much saying, identify this person because of that, but how are you going to make sure that you've identified all the stakeholders that are necessary? And I guess, there probably are more stakeholders than you need to identify for your project, but at least all the stakeholders that need to be considered in order for your project plan to be executed successfully. So how are you going to make sure that you don't overlook anyone that's critical to the success of your plan? How are you going to categorize them or organize them? Like before, it's just your thought process that matters. So just take about, 8-10 minutes and just think about that. If you have questions, let me know. And if you just want to write quietly, please do. All right, so now we're going to talk about how to manage difficult stakeholders. This video is going to be a bit longer. It's going to be about 10 minutes or so. And she's going to cover a lot of different information. And when we are done watching it, we will discuss some of what she tells us. How do you manage expectations? Right, setting them early in the charter. Yes, exactly. So that creates accountability. And what's another, do you see something emerging here about project management? Which is, we're not so much dealing with systems, although systems are very much a part of what we do. But we're talking about people and how we interact with people. Because like we've talked about, and like we've talked about in our project change management class, this is about leadership. It's about motivating and empowering and enrolling people to get things done. So you want to be proactive and manage expectations. What is the technique of the 5 whys? Remember, she said that if someone is maybe questioning her or has some issues and is not happy with how the project's going, she'll have a one-on-one meeting with them and say, if you don't mind, can I ask you why you feel that way about this situation? What's the technique? And they give her an answer. And what does she do next? Yes, exactly. You get to the root of the cause. So when someone gives an explanation, they're probably giving you the explanation that they think that you want to hear. But if you ask them, so why do you feel that way? And they'll tell you. And then you say, well, why do you say that? And eventually they will break down the walls. That's very often they just don't feel comfortable expressing how they really feel. So asking multiple whys gets you to the root of the issue. And when she's talking about staying calm, she says that she'll repeat back to people what she heard them say. Does anyone know what that technique is called? Yes, she says that she will, when someone comes to her with a complaint or they're frustrated, the first thing she'll do is repeat back what she understood the person to be saying. That's actually a really powerful technique, and there's a term for that. Have you heard of a term that describes that? What about the term active listening? Are you familiar with that term? And what is active listening? Exactly. You're making sure that you understood the person correctly. And why is that important?
To find a solution to the problem.
To find a solution, for sure, but fundamentally, what is it about us as human beings?
To be listened to.
To be listened to, and what were you saying?
Yeah.
Same thing, yeah, right? So you can actually get through a lot of problems just by showing the person that you're listening. Everyone wants to be heard. What about being open to compromise? Is compromise a good thing or a bad thing? A bad thing? Not a bad thing. And why is that?
Yeah, environment or relationship.
Mm-hmm. And it's a team activity. We accomplish things together. We are the leaders. We are the managers of the process, but we need the work of our team. And so compromise could be a path to that. And how do you avoid having the compromise derail your plans?
Sure, she mentioned something about going back.
Yeah.
And then reviewing the whole thing, and maybe, I think that's where the compromise comes from.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely on the right track. And she was talking about, I don't remember exactly, but the scope statement, the charter. That's why having those really clearly and accurately laying out the scope of what you're doing is going to prevent your project from getting derailed. And again, that's why for our projects, it's really important that we have very clear scope statements about exactly what's in, exactly what's out, so that we can make compromises, knowing that as long as we stick to the scope statement, we can make that change. We can accommodate that person's point of view. And this is theoretical, obviously, what we're doing for this class, but that's why that level of detail is important. And I'll say it again, you can go back to your case study and your scope statement, and you could adjust it.
It's
now,
a dream when your project...
And you can adjust it so that you can add the proper level of detail to your scope statement, to your work breakdown structure, which we'll talk about in our next session, and that you identify the right stakeholders that are really necessary to bring all this about. When I was getting ready to teach this class, I was thinking about all the systems that we were going to be using. But it occurred to me that just like with our change management class, it's really about managing people. And I wouldn't be doing you a service in teaching you project planning if we didn't really get down to that level of detail. That's why at the beginning of the class, you remember in the first session, I mentioned actionable, that people can actually pick this up and execute it. Because just knowing some systems, but not knowing how to use those systems to actually get things done, that's the thing that's going to really serve you in the future and really justify your degrees. So now let's take another 10 minutes or so and maybe less, maybe about 5 minutes, and talk about your stakeholder engagement strategy. Think about how you will approach your different stakeholders and determine which ones need the most attention or maybe require a light touch. And how are you going to build the relationships with your stakeholders so that you can accomplish the results of your project plan? And again, think about strategy and your approach, not necessarily the specifics. What we talked about today is about the systematic identification of your stakeholders and a strategic approach to engaging them. You know, being proactive is so much more important than being reactive. Now you have the full foundation for completing component 1. So you can go back and revise that. And before our next session, you want to complete component 2 and 3 just in a draft form. And remember to bring those to class, just to print that out and bring what you have. If you want me to give you my feedback and also acknowledge, keep track that you are turning these in systematically, that's going to affect your grade. And if you need it, please schedule office hours with me. I'm happy to talk with you about this outside of class. Next session, we're going to talk about the work breakdown structure, decomposing the work into manageable chunks and deliverables. And I will see you in 15 minutes.